Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Talking All Things Cardiopulm. I am your host, Dr. Rachel Barisi. Before we start our episode, let's chat about Jane. Many of you are familiar with the name, but if you're new to it, Jane.app is a clinic management software and our show sponsor. The Jane team knows that no-shows and late cancellation pose a real challenge for clinics, and they want to help. One way they do this is by making it easy for you to create effective policies that can be enabled and communicated to your patients. The first policy is an online booking payment policy. When integrated with Jane Payments, you have the option to request a card on file or a deposit at the time of booking. You can also enable credit card collection directly in your intake forms for an extra layer of no-show prevention. The next policy is a cancellation policy, which you can request your patients to acknowledge and consent to in an intake form. Jane will also reiterate your cancellation policy in future appointment-related emails sent to your patients so you won't have to remind them. If you want to see these features in action, you can book a personalized demo at jane.app/payments. If you're ready to sign up for Jane account, don't forget to mention my 1-month grace period code cardiopulm1mo. Thanks so much, Jane. All right, welcome. We are going to continue talking about the MOSC today. If you are not aware of what the MOSC is a portfolio essentially created by the ABPTs to help specializations maintain their certification. I don't know exactly the start of it. I actually tried to dig a little bit to find when they created the MOSC, but I'll just give you a little bit of my background since I am knee-deep in MOSC right now. So I sat for my geriatric specialty in March 2013. Yes, I sat for my GCS in March 2013. At that same time, I was starting to apply for cardiopulm residencies. I know I have quite the problem. And literally, the day that I was moving to Michigan, literally, I was driving the Jeep, Nikki's behind me in the U-Haul, and I get a notification that the score is in, pass-fail, it's in. I am on highway something or other, crossing Pennsylvania for hours on end, and I'm going to find out if I pass the GCS. So at some point, we pull over. I find out. I flag Nikki to make sure that she's behind me. And I literally got notification that I passed the GCS while driving for my move for the residency, which was in late June, right? So we'll talk about that process at some point, but it's a long wait to find out. When I passed in June, there was no mention of MOSC. At that time, I was in a residency program. I was like in the thick of ABPTs. We were, I had already filled out the application to sit for GCS. Now I was in the residency. During that time, I had to then apply to sit for the exam the next summer. And still, there was no mention of MOSC to my recollection. The first time it was brought to my attention was when we moved to Kansas. So literally September 2017, we had just moved to Kansas and I had a letter from the ABPTs. This was literally the time that I was not going to deal with any of this. So I already had been a GCS since 2013. It's 2017. I'm 4 years in. I've had no mention of doing anything with a MOSC up until this point. And in 2017, I had notification that there was MOSC accessibility for the CCS. So I had already passed in 2015. I'm now 2 years in. So to my recollection, it was somewhere around 2017 that this process became a thing. And before the MOSC was a process, people who were recertifying at the 10-year mark would just resit for the exam. So the creation of the MOSC was literally to help people who are already certified prove their competency in their specialization area to not have to have them sit, essentially. You still have the option. You could choose to not do the MOSC and just resit at the 10-year mark if you chose. When you do the MOSC, you are essentially inputting a portfolio every 3 years. So you input at year 3, 6, and 9. And then year 10, you resit for the exam, but it's a self-study exam. And from my understanding is you get 3 months to take the exam, and it's open book essentially. So a little less stressful than resitting for for the actual exam. In that cycle, you have to show competency in different areas. So last week, I went in deep on ICF because that verbiage is not something that we are using on a regular basis, and it's a really big part of the case reflection. Part 3, I'm going to go into detail about the case reflection, and we're going to go through each of the parts and really break down that process. Today, I want to talk about the other aspects of the portfolio. So, first and foremost, you have to show competency or continued maintenance of your specialization by treating patients in that category, right? So, cardial pulm, I should be seeing cardial pulm patients. You have to show 200 hours of direct patient care every cycle. And again, every cycle is 3 years' time. When we're talking about, I have the application open right now, so I'm going to kind of pull some sections up and go through some nitty gritty. So if you're not sitting for the MOSC yet and you're just listening to listen, that's great. I think having an idea of what you need to do is super important. If you are actually, filling out the MOSC, this would be a great thing to open while you're listening to this podcast, because I'm going to help you kind of walk through it. I was actually just on a call with a mentee who just passed her CCS this summer, so she is just being introduced to the MOSC cycle, and so we literally started going through every aspect of it so she can prepare. Essentially, my goal is that you don't do what I did. Okay, we'll talk about where I'm at right now and how I want you to not make the mistakes that I made. So first and foremost, we're going to go into the part of the application that's called PT Experience. In the PT Experience section, that's where you're going to fill out your direct patient hours. And so if you're full-time, this is easy peasy. Essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to put the information of the place that you work, the facility name, and you're going to put a time frame in. That time frame, that date, the start and end date is the start and end date of the cycle. So the cycle that I have open right now is from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. In the date section, that is what I'm putting. What it will then do, the computer will calculate the number of weeks in that date cycle. So in that date cycle, I have 146 weeks. Then you have to document how many weeks of 146 that you worked. So again, if you're full-time, this is super easy. 146 is a number of weeks. You're going to deduct any major absences, any vacation time. Essentially, when you're taking off near a week at a time, you deduct that. Then you put in how many hours a week you work. So again, if you're full-time, this is relatively straightforward. You probably work 40 hours a week. If you know that you work more than that, you obviously can put more than that. Then from that point, you have to determine how much percent that you're actually working in the clinical practice specialty area, and then how many percent of that is direct care. So for instance, when I was at the VA, I assisted running a residency. I was running outpatient cardiac and pulmonary rehab. I was also running telehealth cardiac rehab at the time, and I was mentoring. So my day was very different every single day. And I didn't have necessarily, if I had an 8-hour workday, just for, easy numbers, all 8 hours weren't patient care. So if you know that you have a lot of different tasks in your day, you can create an Excel file, which I'm actually going to do. I might share it with you, but it might not help you depending on what kind of setting you're in. But essentially, it'll allow you to track your time a little bit more efficiently, so you could be closer to the percent mark. But let's say at that setting, I was probably 70% caseload and then 30% somewhere administration and mentoring. So I would say 70% was direct patient care. And then percent clinical practice in my specialty area. At the VA, I was close to 100%. I was treating primarily cardiac pulmonary patients. And if it was someone that wasn't a true cardiac or pulmonary, they likely were in the outskirts, like diabetes and peripheral arterial disease will fit in there. But like some of the outskirt type diagnoses like wound care fits into cardiopulm. So I was probably near 100% at that time in that setting. When I was at my PRN position in Michigan, I worked on the hearts team. So same thing, 100% of my time was treating within my specialty area. And then because I was PRN, I really didn't have any administrative tasks. Pretty close to 100% of my time was direct patient care. So just to give you some idea, if you have one of those jobs where you're a supervisor now and you're not seeing as many patients, it might be worth keeping an Excel doc on the days that you are treating so that you can have a roundabout average. The other thing that you want to consider is if you are supervising staff. So again, like when I was at the VA, I was mentoring. Those mentoring hours, this direct supervision of another physical therapist who are treating patients, and I have impact on said patient, counts. It has a separate section for supervision so that it's not like a double dip type thing, but make sure that you're kind of paying attention to those things. In the world of direct patient care hours, it's including supervision, consultation, mentorship, even things like documentation, chart review. If you are potentially, like when you're mentoring, you are typically editing notes or giving feedback on notes about patients, all of that counts in this direct patient care situation. So just to have some idea, if you are in a position where maybe you're not 100% patient care anymore, it gives you leeway to get your time, especially if you're still impacting patients kind of from a distance, if that makes sense. But I do have to say, being PRN, it's a little more tricky to document. So for instance, for PRN, my times have changed over the last, how many years are we now? 2017. So well, actually it was 2018. So, 6 years time, how many days a week changes for me. I used to be just maybe like 2 or 3 times a month. Now I average probably around 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 2 days a week. It's not set in stone, so there's variability. So days and hours would be better for me versus calculating weeks. So I'm going to create an Excel doc to help document that because I track all my days, my hours worked, what unit I'm typically on, like what patient caseload I work with, especially because I'm GCS, CCS, I have to make sure that I'm not double dipping time and that I'm showing that, I have time for both and that I'm seeing both populations. And in the hospital setting that I'm in, that's very easy to do, especially if I'm on different units. So being able to track the primary diagnosis is another thing you want to consider. On the MOSC cycle in that PT experience, it gives you a space to say what patient population you typically work with. It's not very in-depth, so don't go crazy tracking, all the diagnoses that you're seeing. If you're applying the first time, it would be important to do that. We actually had to show that in our residency to make sure that we were showing variety in our patient diagnoses, and they were all related to cardiopulm. For this, not really. You only have about 4 choices. They have a drop-down menu of about 50 diagnoses, and you can only pick 4, I should say. So don't go too crazy about tracking, but if you do have 2 specialty areas or you're PRN and maybe on different units, and you want to be consistent with how you're documenting, that could be a great way to do that. So I'm going to create that Excel doc. I already have one in existence. The weeks part, I wasn't tracking well. So now I'm going back into the calendar based on the days and trying to figure out a nice way to see if I can expedite this for the future. So just kind of plug and go. What I do recommend, especially if you're PRN, that you track your days, you track your hours, and you track, categorically the type of patients that you're seeing. It will make your life easier in the long run. And then if you work for multiple settings, you have the option to put in multiple settings. And really that's it. It's a kind of easy thing. One thing I will say, there is a difference between being self-employed and working for a company. If you work for a company, you're going to send those hours to a supervisor, and that supervisor checks off on, verifies your time and such. I usually give a heads up to the supervisor that email will be coming. So like after I submit, I usually send them a message that they're going to get a notification, probably from ABPTs, verifying my hours worked in said specialty area. So just give the heads up so there's not a delay. And that actually usually comes in pretty quickly. You don't necessarily have to finish the entire application to submit that. So plug and go is kind of what my advice is for this to make your life easier. And then the MOSC really isn't that difficult. When you're trying to tackle it multiple years at a time, not so fun. Learn from my mistakes, please. Okay, so the other piece of this is professional development. So the next section after your PT experience comes into professional development. This area has 3 major categories that you can input to show diversity in your specialization, kind of the things that you're doing over 3 years' time. This is really that nice little portfolio piece. So my advice to you, make a folder on your desktop called MOSC. And within that folder, you're going to put a couple of categories. Service, that's going to be a folder. Teaching, that's a folder. Peer-reviewed research, or just research, however you want to document that. And CEUs. So you should have about four folders in your MOSC folder. Just organize your stuff. If it's organized, this is like no big deal. Then I would recommend, because as soon as you have access to it, you can go in and out of the application. Anytime you do something big, open that application. Throw it in your MOSC folder. Maybe set a reminder on your phone every 3 to 6 months. Peek in. Do you need to add anything? Good to go. It will make your life so much easier. We'll go into the reason why I have 3 in a little bit. I've completed 1 of 3. So we're cruising now. I'm already actually halfway through the second one, and I think we'll kind of be squared away in no time. Now that I have a little bit of a routine and I know my categories, that's part of it too. The ABPTs website does a good job of showing you what things count per category. I'm going to talk about them. I have some lists written out based on that website, and I will link that website in the show notes. But basically, anytime you do something in your profession, whether it's a continuing ed course, teaching a class, an in-service, you did service for the profession, you did service in the community, you wrote up a case study, you are writing a research article, you're participating in a research article, anything that you are doing outside of your normal day-to-day job, document it, put it in your MOSC folder, go to your application, and this thing will be easy peasy. All right. So professional development is broken up into 3 categories. The first category is professional service. There's a lot of different ways that you can get professional service. There aren't necessarily descriptions for each of the things on the list. So I'm going to go through a couple of them. But basically, anytime that you're involved in the APTA or your specialty section, that is included as professional service. So for instance, if you're a CCS, at CSM, you'll get all sorts of emails about volunteering for the chapter, whether that's manning the table at the exhibit hall or introducing lecturers at CSM. That's professional service towards your chapter. If you do an activity like that, document it, throw it in your MOSC. Okay. Task force groups. This one's very varied because it can be ABPTs, it could be APTA, or it could be a professional group. So for instance, if you work in a hospital and you have a task force for LVADs, you have a task force for CVAs, you have a task force for something, you're a part of it, you run it, you are active in it, professional service. Document it, document your time, document the description, give it a title, throw it in your MOSC, put it in your folder, like simultaneous. Your life will be very easy. Item writing. Item writing is a big thing for APTA, ABPTS. You can become an item writer for your specialty area. This is something that I cannot do. So I was a mentor in a residency, couldn't become an item writer because I'm teaching residents to prepare for that. I now mentor clinicians who want to sit for their CCS. So item writing, unfortunately, is out for me. If you do it for APTA, MPTE, that could technically count too. Another piece that I can't do because I help prepare students to sit for the MPTE. So unfortunately, item writing has been a no category for me, but it can be a very wonderful category because you get a lot of mentorship in writing questions, and you really learn the skill of writing a good question, and you are part of focus groups, and you have to research your question. You kind of talk out the questions in a group setting. Things get voted on and such. So it can be a really great learning process for you. So if you're interested in something like that, that could be a really wonderful thing, especially if you're planning on potentially doing faculty somewhere at some point. And this is across specialties, by the way. So GCS, CCS, women's health, all of the specialty areas have very similar qualifications for their MOSC. The only one that seems to be a little bit different, and I can't speak to it, is the electrophysiologic specialty. They have a little bit of differences, especially on their case, that are required. But for the most part, the MOSC is across specialty areas. So some other things that can count for professional service is if you start a residency or fellowship program, or if you provide community service related to your specialty area. And then there's another category because it gives you a little bit of room for leeway. Obviously, you have to explain what the other is. So that's category one. There are 3 categories in total. For every MOSC cycle, you have to complete tasks in at least 2 of the 3 categories, equating to 10 MOSC credits. Each task or activity gets a different weight, but it will equal to 10. And then there's like a max amount. So for instance, we'll get to it in a second, but teaching a university class or a course gives you 5 MOSC credits in that category. When I was in faculty, I could hit my 10 in no time, but it will max you out per course at 5, and then it will max you out for the category because it wants you to get 2 categories hit. In the 3 years' time, in the 9 years' time, you have to hit all 3 categories at least once. So hopefully that made sense. Okay, so category 2, I'm going to call this one education. It's not labeled this way, but I think it kind of helps break down the information. Education basically can be anything like you completed a CE course related to your specialty area, you get 1 MOSC unit per 10 contact hours. If you completed a residency or fellowship, that is going to give you, I think, I think that gives you 5. I didn't write that one down. But you can only do that once in the 3-year cycle. A little nuance here. If you did a residency, you can only count it once. So typically, if you do a residency program, that residency program expedites your application. So if your residency is counting for your initial certification, you cannot use your residency to count for cycle 1. Okay. So if you went to a residency program, in order to qualify to sit for the exam, you then cannot double dip and use the residency credits for the first cycle. Okay, you can only use the residency to count once. If you take a college or university course, you get 5 MOSC credits, again, pertaining to your specialty area. If you're teaching a college or university course, and you're the primary instructor, you get 5 MOSC credits. If you're the secondary instructor or assistant, you get 2 MOSC credits per course. And then if you're teaching a CEU course, you get 2 MOSC credits for every hour, and then you get maxed out at 5. So let's say you taught a course, and your course is 3 hours long. You're only going to get 5 credits. You're not going to get 6. And then let's say you taught that course 4 times in a year. You can only count it once. Okay. So that's essentially category 2. So you take a CEU, you teach a CEU, you take a college course, you teach a college course, residency. So something in that category. Okay. The last category I'm going to call peer-reviewed versus peer-reviewed versus non-peer reviewed. And this is going to be presentation versus research. That's kind of the general theme of category 3. Category 3 is professional presentations. So peer-reviewed presentations like a platform or a poster presentation at a state or national conference. If you're an invited speaker, each are worth 2 credits. A non-peer-reviewed presentation would be more like an in-service or a lunch and learn, or a presentation to a client-based group or a community-based group. And then each is worth 1 MOSC credit. Professional writing. So if you're doing a book chapter or a peer-reviewed journal article or a grant proposal or some sort of case study or case report write-up, that's considered 3 or worth 3 MOSC credits. And then non-peer-reviewed writing would be like a non-peer-reviewed publication, or if you wrote a review or a commentary, if you're a manuscript reviewer, or potentially professional meeting abstract reviewer. So it really does break it down pretty nicely. There's different categories that you can basically be a part of. If you feel that like maybe you haven't done anything, look at the list and see if something piques your interest and try to add it into your, goals for the year. And the last one in this category is research. Basically, if you're a part of a physical therapy outcome database, or if you contribute to a physical therapy research project, counts, and you get 1 MOSC credit per project, and you can max out at 5. So each one gives you its own kind of thing. There's pretty much an other category in each one of the sections, which is really nice because it kind of gives you a little bit of leeway. It's a lot of diversity in the things that we do, especially like in faculty. I would run like student research groups or community-based falls programs. And so all of those things would fit into different categories. The one thing I will tell you is you have to be careful about not double dipping. So for instance, if I took a student group to do a community-based falls assessment, I could technically put that in my direct supervision or, patient care hours, or I could add it to this professional development area in, community group. So just be careful that you don't double dip or I'm sorry, professional service is what I meant to say. So don't double dip. If you put it in for service, you put it in for service. If you put it in for hours, you put it in for hours. You can't put it in both places. I think that's pretty standard type stuff. So if you don't input this stuff immediately, what things should you be tracking? So first of all, if you have a certification or any type of proof that you did something, print it, put it in a folder. Digital is better because this whole process is digital. It's not like you're handing in, a file. So if you have some sort of certificate, download it, put it into your MOSC folder. If you have, if you're teaching a course, it's going to ask you for something like a syllabus and a content outline. So typically, if you're in academia, you'll give your students a syllabus and a content outline. Syllabus gives you like all the need to know nitty gritty about the course, including attendance and grading and expectations and university policies and like COVID protocols when that was a thing. For the MOSC, it asked for like a synopsis syllabi. And so basically you would put all the major things, the title of the course description, the credit hours, the start and stop time of the course itself, how many hours a week, that kind of stuff, the objectives of the course, and then take that content outline and stick it into that one document. So it's a one document upload, and they have all the information in that, in that one document. And the content outline typically is your date, your lecture title, potentially any assignments attached to it, that kind of thing. So I just make a new file from my 2 files already existent, put it in your MOSC folder, or just upload it as soon as your course is ready to go. Then it's going to ask you things like a description. So everything that you submit will have the type of activity, so the category it belongs to, and then it'll have a drop-down menu for you to pick from. Then you're going to give it an activity title. So if you did an in-service, what was the title of that in-service? You did a community group, what was the title of that community group? You did item writing, right? So just as long as you're kind of titling everything, giving it a description, what organization was it a part of? Where was the location that this thing existed? They asked for city and state, start and end date, and then you upload something. The only thing that's different with CEU courses is that you have to upload the certificate, the contact hours, the delivery method. So was it in person versus virtual, both, that kind of thing. But for the most part, they all follow a very similar category. So you keep track of it early on, put it in your folder, and do it maybe every 3 to 6 months. Or as soon as you complete the task, go straight to your MOSC, and this thing will be no problem. So essentially you have to get 10 MOSC credits in two separate categories, so 10 total per 3 years, and then you should have 30 by the end of the 9-year time. So hopefully that made sense. To me, the professional development part isn't very cumbersome at all, especially if you keep track of the things that you're doing. So even though even though I'm behind on my MOSC, I have all my stuff in folders, and so this part just is easy. I just have to kind of plug and play. But when you're doing 3 years time, you have to remember all the things that you did. So truly, it's just easier if you're doing it close to real time. Okay, then you're going to do your reflective portfolio, and the reflective portfolio is your case. I'm not going to go into the details of the case today. Excuse me. We'll talk about that on part 3, just because it's going to take a little bit of time, and I'll give some examples throughout. Once you upload your portfolio, the last thing that you have to do is pay for the cycle. So because I learned the pricing last night, I will tell you what it is. So it's obviously cheaper if you're an APTA member. My APTA membership expired literally this week. I think it was maybe yesterday or the day before, because I saw an email come in saying, "Hey, I saw that you left the acute care cardiopulm section. Hope you're not leaving." And I'm like, "Oh no, I just expired." I went to submit the MOSC cycle yesterday. It had me flagged as a non-member. The non-member fee for the cycle is $400. The member fee is $220. So basically you pay $220 3 times over a 9-year span, versus the one big exam piece, I guess, at the end. So just so you know, from a pricing perspective, then you submit the application and it goes to review, and a group of people will review your application and basically say it's good, or they might send you back feedback. The people that review these applications, that would be professional service. So if that's something that you're interested in, ABPTs, very hard to say that quickly, are always asking for volunteers and things like that. So if you want to get involved, highly recommend you look at your specialty chapter and see if they're doing any applications for positions, if they're seeking out reviewers or item writers or whatever. Usually there's a time frame on when they'll do applications for different positions, but some of the other things they'll do throughout the year. So if you're interested in getting involved, if you're like, I need to start, doing some service and I'm not doing that yet, that would be a good place to start if you're just looking for some options. All right. So I think that's pretty much the gist of the MOSC. I think it's a great idea. I think it also kind of holds you accountable to maintaining your specialty and having some variety in the things that you do. I'll tell you the background as to why I have 3 going right now. So as I told you, in 2017, I got the first letter that I should start this MOSC cycle for my CCS. I never got it for my GCS. In 2017, in September 2017, we did all the things that you're not supposed to do at the same time. We quit our jobs, we bought a house, we moved across the country, we had a wedding, and we went on a honeymoon, and we were both searching for 2 jobs. So to be quite honest, I was like, I'll deal with this later. What I didn't realize was I didn't think the GCS could jump into the MOSC cycle, even though it was new. So CCS part I started, whenever I needed to. The GCS I did not. So somewhere around 2020, I was getting, I'm close to renewal, and I was like, hey, how does this process work? And actually, it was later than that. It was like 2022. I think I checked in because 2023, allegedly I would be up, but then COVID happened. So they pushed it a year. So essentially I had to backdate 2 MOSCs time. So basically I have to fill out the cycles for 2 sections of the MOSC. And then this summer I will sit for re-exam for the GCS. I also have my last cycle of the CCS due this summer, and then I would sit next round, I think, next year. I don't know how, I think it would be next summer. So I have 3 MOSC cycles open. I finished 1 of 3. I honestly took longer than I should have with the case. I started the only thing I had left was the case. And then CSM happened, and I was prepping for CSM, and I just put it off. When you have cycles that, are past tense, you have to ask them to reopen it. So fun fact, you can email ABPTs if you get locked out of your cycle. They can reopen it. When you ask them for help, give them a time frame. I didn't know that you can do that. So I learned that at CSM actually. So if you get locked out, so when I came back from CSM, I was like, okay, I would like 30 days open, and I almost had it. And I timed out literally on the last day. I had like 1 section left that I had to do, and I had to reopen it. So I'm 1 of 3. I'm actually halfway through my CCS one, and my new GCS just got reopened. So I don't know if I told this story to you. one of the ABPTS staff people who answer said emails. I met this person at CSM, but I don't know if I told this story. So it was the last night of CSM. Me and Nikki were heading back to the room to like pack, and we were in the elevator with one other person. And I just looked at her and said, "Do I know you?" I had this like insane internal feeling as if I knew this human. I've never actually met her, but I felt like I knew the person who was in the elevator. I mean, chances are you're a CSM, this person is related to the physical therapy profession. So I said, are you a PT? And she said, well, I'm not a PT, but I work for the APTA. And I said, oh, that's great. I feel like I know you for some reason. She's like, she has no idea who I am. I was like, what do you do? She's like, oh, I work for the ABPTS specialty. And I was like, oh, okay. And so we start talking, and I was like, oh my God, you're Brenda. And she's like, oh my God, I know exactly who you are. I was like, hey, when we get back, I'm going to send you an email. I was like, I'm sorry that I've asked you to reopen for me like 3 times. She's like, oh, no problem. It happens all the time. She's like, just ask for how long you want it open. And I was like, oh, didn't know I could do that. So literally, we got off the elevator just to chat. I took a selfie with this woman, and it was, the universe is funny sometimes. And I just had this like innate feeling that I knew this human. And literally, I had been corresponding with her via email probably for 3 months, since like October. So October to February, we had a couple of email exchanges, and this woman is on my elevator heading up to her room. So anyway, Brenda is wonderful. I'm very thankful for her. She's very quick to respond, and she has to deal with people, delinquents like me, who are asking for a reopening of the application. So I'm going to teach you all the things not to do and how to prepare yourself so that this MOSC cycle really isn't any big deal. I think it's a wonderful program. And when I get to the recertification part, I'm sure I'll talk about like that whole process and how it feels, and give some advice on maybe how to tackle that. Because for me, keeping a test open for 3 months' time feels like a long time. But I feel like if you use the whole time, it's going to be like over. And did you start it? So I'm preparing for that. That's going to be the summer project. So I'm sure I'll talk about it. Okay, we're going to do one more talk of the MOSC, and I'm going to sit down and just break down how to prepare your case and kind of some of the stuff behind that to make that part of the MOSC cycle super easy and ready to go. All right, I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions about the MOSC, if you have any questions about sitting for your CCS or GCS, if you're looking for a mentor for CCS, I do that. So I do one-on-one mentoring. And if you're sitting for the CCS, I have a year-long process, or 10-month process at least, to get you to cross that finish line. And so if you are interested, please reach out to me and we'll get that set up. And I'll drop my links in the show notes as well. Lastly, if you have not joined my newsletter, I'm going to put that link in the show notes. Join that newsletter. I'm getting a little bit more active in that process, just talking to you on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, and I'm hoping to give a little bit more cardiopulm content, discuss some articles similar to this, but maybe with a little bit more of my clinical tip, lifey stuff, and you also have access to anything that I might be hosting. So again, if you have any questions, if you enjoyed this episode, drop me some stars, write a review. It's very much appreciated. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And whatever you have to do, get after it.